How's everybody doing? You guys look great. Thank you so much for coming. My name is G. Horton.
I'm Naimah Bilal.
And we have the lovely Stephanie Byrd. Yes.
Welcome to the Mercantile.
So this is our first official Urban Consulate conversation. And when we collectively were thinking about who could we invite to be our first guest, we had a short list of names. Among that list, we had Stephanie. And I can recall sending her a text message to see if she'd be interested in being a part of this conversation. And her initial reaction was, of course.
Ask more questions.
But when she walked in the building, she said, note to self, make sure you ask more questions. So thank you, Stephanie, again.
We have a lot of thank yous to extend this evening, not least to everybody here for coming out, the parking and rush hour, and it's Monday, and now we're all here gathered to have some really rich dialogue with each other. So we're thankful and grateful for you being here. I'm personally grateful to this guy to my left, G. Horton, and our third host, is that 2 or 3? Arba, which one is that? 3? Our third host, Megan Trishler, who isn't here today because she, very wisely, is on a sabbatical. And she said, I'm going to take some time to do me, figure some things out, and I'll be back. So come back. Beginning of March, we're going to have a great dialogue with Megan hosting, but I just wanted to say a big thank you to G.
Yeah, so I think it'll be helpful, Naimah, if you can kind of just give the audience some insight on how all of this came about, the Urban Consulate as it relates to Cincinnati. Why are we here?
So we have a lot more thank yous to make. The Urban Consulate was conceived as a series of salon conversations around the country, Cincinnati being the most recent city to take on this project. It was founded by a woman named Claire Nelson. Any of you happen to attend the Civic Symposium back in November? Raise your hands really high. So a lot of you got a very good dose of what this could be and what this is, and now here we are, 2.5 months later, bringing it to you. Claire Nelson and her husband founded Urban Consulate as a way to explore dialogue about the city. And all of these dialogues come together with the view that in order to bring about change and bring about the kinds of conversations we need to be having to advance the city, we have to come together as a group and speak. And so these conversations are going to unfold in a way that seeks to illuminate some of the aspects of city living and city advancement. We're going to learn together, we're going to heal together, and we're going to act together. So the Civic Symposium that happened back in November think of it as the launch pad for what we're starting right now in 2020, Urban Consulate. An ongoing series of monthly dialogues every second Monday right here in the Mercantile Library, and we'll have distinguished guests such as Stephanie, our very first guest, and we'll be learning about various aspects of our great city of Cincinnati, the good, right, the challenging, and the opportunity, and everything in between, and doing it in a way that creates a two-way dialogue. So I hope that gives everybody a sense as to what this is about and the role that you're going to play. I hope, G, you'll be able to give them a sense of how they're going to be part of building this as well.
Absolutely. If I can go back to the Civic Symposium. So, as she mentioned, it was in November, and we have some of the participants here in the audience. We didn't know what to expect, right? So what we decided to do was to engage city shapers, change makers from our city. And it was, in fact, there was 10 change makers here in Cincinnati who we identified as individuals in their individual sectors who are playing instrumental roles in changing the narrative in our city. So we identified those 10 individuals, and then we paired them up with 10 additional folks from other cities. We had no idea what was going to happen to get all of those egos in one room, right? And to sit here today, I would say what we learned, the biggest thing was that connectivity is everything that the Urban Consulate is about. So just watching the interactions, watching the relationships develop and take off, for me personally, was a powerful. It was powerful to see that happening because it allowed me to envision what the Urban Consulate could mean for Cincinnati. So, in a nutshell, from what I learned, the Urban Consulate is a space. It's a space that provides a platform so that we can amplify ideas, we can exchange voices, we can be heard, we can talk about issues that aren't typically discussed. So it was, yeah.
Yeah, no, I echo that point. Actually, since you mentioned we had some participants who are here in the audience, I'd love to have those participants stand up and be recognized. We have Chase Cantrell, one of the original Urban Consulate host out of Detroit. Come on, stand up, Chase. Everybody give him some snaps. We also have, I saw Dina here. Where'd she go? Stand up.
Dina Taylor from 3CDC.
Dina Taylor from 3CDC. And Dina and Chase were actually paired up as city twins, and they had a fantastic dialogue, far-reaching dialogue about many things as it pertains to city development and management, zoning, fun, great conversations too. So, where should we take it from here?
I think we should get started.
I think you're right.
So I think a lot of people came here to hear Stephanie.
Yeah.
So we're gonna engage in a very philosophical, deep conversation, but really just on a Monday. But really allow you guys to get to know her and the role she has played in her leadership capacity here in our city. So
that's right. So here's the thing we decided, Stephanie, and I hope you're okay with this, is we weren't going to read your bio because it's extensive. And you can go to Google for that. You can Google her. But it is important for everybody to know that you do operate at a very high perch here in Cincinnati as the president and CEO of both the Dayton and Cincinnati regions of the Red Cross. So we are so thrilled to have you here this evening. And we hope to learn a lot from you. The question that we would love to start out with, just to get a sense as to who you are as a person and then grounded in our city, is when did you know that you had fallen in love with the city of Cincinnati?
I love that question. Thank you, first of all, for asking me to do this. I truly should have asked more questions. I love this guy. He's, I don't know why this mic keeps turning off. Thank you. I had not heard of the Civic Symposium, thus did not know about the Urban Consulate, but was just excited to hear this conversation was beginning to happen in this community. Because one of the things that has caused me to love the city is our quest to be the best we can be and being very transparent about our opportunities to get better and better. But I think I really fell in love with Cincinnati before I even lived in Cincinnati, because Cincinnati's been a part of me. I'm not from here originally. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana, so just right up the street. But surprisingly, when I grew up in Indianapolis, or maybe not so surprisingly, we would come to Cincinnati for vacations. Our vacations were, road trips with my mom, who divorced my father when I was 2. But she was committed to giving us the vacations that she could afford, and so we got on the road and we'd come here. And we'd go to the zoo. As I got older, we went to Kings Island because Kings Island didn't exist when I was really little, so it tells you a little bit about my age. And we would come here to shop for special occasions. I got my first prom dress here. And so Cincinnati was a part of my growing up. So I guess not surprisingly, when I was looking for schools to go to, I looked in this area, ended up at Miami University, just again up the road. I wanted to leave Indiana because I went to a high school that was huge. My class had 1,100 kids in it, my class. And probably 80% of them went to IU. And I thought, I am not going to go to IU because I love you all, but I need a different scene. So I left the state and came to Miami. But it was when I was at Miami when I really began to become more politically aware Although growing up at my house, it was not uncommon to have a lot of political discussions. I lived with my grandparents and my mom and my two siblings, and we had a lot of conversations about politics. And coming to Miami and then visiting Cincinnati to do all of the entertainment things, I became very aware of the fact that the city was very progressive in terms of who was running the city politically. Marion Spencer was on city council, Bobby Stern was on city council, Ted Berry had been mayor of the city back in the 70s, and none of those kinds of dynamics had happened in Indianapolis. So I thought this city really has a lot to offer for somebody like me. And so as I graduated, went back to Indianapolis for a short period of time, but then enrolled in graduate school at Xavier. And I absolutely fell in love. Xavier was a great experience for me. I truly felt like I belonged there, was very welcome there. And I really had a great start, great introduction. My first job was at Christ Hospital when I finished my master's degree. Just a great, opportunity to thrive. But with, like any relationship, there are the ups and downs. And, while I love the city, I know that there are also those moments where I think, when are we going to get a clue on some of the things that we just ought to be doing better in 2020? And, we have faced those things over the years and are doing better, but we always seem to have more to do and tend to kind of backslide a little bit before we jump forward. And I think about those instances where I thought about leaving the city and kind of fell out of love with Cincinnati, because I do have three children, two African-American men now. They're all adults and made it to adulthood, praise God, and one daughter. But we in the 90s had some real issues with race relations. I think that the pinnacle of that was in 2001 with the civil unrest. And I just wondered if this is a place where I wanted my children to be in high school, and, the fear of what they might encounter in doing so. But then I fell in love again, because things like the Can Commission happened. And the reversal of what was issued to that would allow housing discrimination for LGBTQ individuals reversed. And I think it was a great example of the city examining where it was, having a quest to do better, and doing things to invest in our future that would get us beyond that crisis of the moment. And some of the work that I did coming out of the Can Commission, I did for 14 years in trying to transform education for young children. Another opportunity to fall in love, because we took the time to invest in young children. First through the Success by Six initiative at United Way, then more recently in 2016 with the passage of the Preschool Promise, which we continue to invest in. It's up for re-election or voting in this year. And it said that we want the best for all children. And so it gave me an opportunity to be a part of that, to help the city move beyond the controversy of the civil unrest, and put children on a path to success by starting at their various early educational years. And so hard not to love a city that's willing to do that. And I see, other examples of that as we look at what's going on with transportation, what's happening with entrepreneurship, and things that we see happening with mortar. And, I'm very optimistic that we are looking to move beyond our history and try and elevate the conversation to figure out how we do that collectively, because we have a lot of opportunity for inclusion and belonging, so that everyone feels like they're part of the solution and not being given a solution.
So it sounds like, just listening to your story, there's been this fall in love, fall out of love relationship with Cincinnati, right? Is it safe to say that?
Yeah, not completely out of love, because I never left. And if I really fell out of love, I would leave. But I had some frustrations that made me really think about whether or not the city really could live up to its full potential. Because we kept doing things that fractured us. I think about, the race relations issues are, while better, are still there. Some of that is rooted in the economic opportunities or lack thereof for African Americans and others in the community. Poverty is still a big issue. It seems to be unabated. Homelessness has increased. We're a microcosm of the country in many ways, so it's not just Cincinnati. I think we as a country have to come to grips with what we do with people who deserve to have the best opportunity for success in this country. But by virtue of where they were born, by virtue of what their parents may or may not have known, by virtue of whether or not they had a high-quality early learning and educational experience, they've not been able to participate. And social immobility is a real thing. It's a real thing here. Because if you're born in this city, the chances are that you will continue to be poor and not be able to lift yourself out of poverty. And that is not acceptable in a city that is striving on so many levels. To have a sector of our community that just has not been able to participate. And so having solutions that include those who haven't been able to be a part, I think are really key. We've tried a lot of other things. I don't know that we've gotten really good at conversations like this and being inclusive about who's at the table and what's really going to work in getting them to participate and be a part of the success that we're seeing as a region.
So we can talk. You just opened up a can of worms, and I just want to just dive into that can. So we're in a different generation, right? And one of the things I look at when we initially met was your love is one thing, but your commitment to stay, because you could have left. Mm-hmm. You could have went back home. You could have went anywhere else. But why did you decide to say, I want to fight the fight here in our city? And I think for the folks within my generation, it'll be great to hear that too, because we too are dealing with challenges as well. They may look different, but they feel the same, I would imagine. So I'm just curious to.
Well, running, if you choose not to fight and you run, then you really don't win. Because you've not done anything to solve the issue. And part of my psyche, part of my upbringing has been that until you can say that you've done your very best, it's hard to be critical of what others are doing. And I think that there's more that I can do. I attempt to do that, and part of that is in being an example for my kids. 2 of them don't live here. One of them does. The 2 that don't read the news about what's going on in Cincinnati as much as I do, sometimes more. They tell me what's going on, sometimes more than I'm able to look at the newspaper and find out for myself. But I think that this city has a lot to offer. I fell in love with it when I was a child because of the things that I mentioned, but there are some really, really wonderful attributes that when you leave, you realize that you've left something really good. I've visited other cities. I have friends in other cities, and I visit them, and sure, they have their assets as well, but so does Cincinnati. And I've been here longer than I ever lived in Indianapolis, so it has become my home, even though I go back and forth to Indianapolis on occasion. But I want to be a part of making it better. And having conversations like this, we have a lot of these at my house because, it's like the United Nations at my house when my kids come to town and bring their friends. But part of it is helping the younger generation help find those solutions. And my lessons, what I've learned personally and professionally, what I've seen the city do as a result of some of our hard moments, are examples of why you have to dig in and not run. Running's easy. You're right, I could have. That's easy. But then the problems remain. And I still have, family and friends here that I would like to be able to see thrive and do well. And the opportunities for the little kids who now have preschool as an option for the world that they're going into in Cincinnati to be better. So it's a bit altruistic, but I think it all starts with each of us being a part of the solution, and running never gets you what would happen if you stayed.
I would agree. I'm gonna ask one more question, then I'm gonna let Naimah ask, because I have a tendency of hogging the questions. So this last question for me, before Naimah takes the wheel with questions, I'm not from Cincinnati as well, but oftentimes I get the question, so where do you live? Or what community? Or what high school? And I get it. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, and it's a similar dynamic, but I want to ask the question framed in a different way. And my question to you is, rather than where do you live or what neighborhood do you have an affinity to, where's your heart right now as it relates to this city?
Wow, it's a really good question. I am probably seen as a suburbanite because I don't live in the city. But my heart is certainly with the city and not outside of Hamilton County. I have seen so much change in the city and so much in this county since I moved here many, many years ago. And when I moved here, the county was red. I think the county is now purple. The city is blue. The city was probably more purple when I first moved here, maybe more violet, reddish purple. And so I have seen things change, but I've seen people leave the city instead of stay. And their leaving has been, I think, out of fear for what might happen if it did become purple, instead of staying and being a part of the solution of making us the melting pot that we should be. And so I live in Glendale. I live within the 275 Beltway. I think I always will. But I do think about moving back into the city. When I first moved here, I lived in Walnut Hills on Victory Parkway. Loved it. Lived there 3 years. And then I was married at the time, and for convenience purposes, because my then husband worked in Middletown, we moved out so that he wasn't driving a disproportionately long period of time versus my drive. So all of those things that happen in your personal life that cause you to make the decisions that you make. It's good for the family at that time, but now that my kids are grown, I toy with the idea of moving back into the city. But I think there are so many other things that I could be doing than trying to sell a big house out in Glendale that nobody will want to buy because I've been there 30 years. So
I was kind of piggybacking on that question. As the president and CEO of a large swath of the Red Cross chapter, so you do both Dayton and Cincinnati, I have a lot of curiosities about how you split, how you're learning about the unique needs of each city. Maybe we can park that question. I'm very curious about a dynamic I'm witnessing as a Cincinnati resident, a member of the arts community. It may be happening at a slow pace, but what I am seeing, which is very encouraging about the direction our city is taking and will take to give more seats at the table to people that represent our city, whereas a lot of the institutions and agencies in our city may have historically been more homogenous, white, people leading enterprises. You are an amazing woman. You happen to be a black woman at the helm of an enterprise. So this is something I've observed just as a citizen of this city, which is very encouraging. It may be happening at a bit of a glacial pace, but it's happening. It's visible, and there's no shortage of talent out there to leverage. So my question for you is, as you began to put together the pieces of your career passions, your personal passions, what was the distinct point where you realized you needed to pursue leadership to advance a lot of those passions and career aims?
We all have our upbringings and the things that are in the back of our head that influence the decisions that we make and our choices. And for me, growing up in the family that I grew up in, leading was expected. Following was not accepted. And being a leader and not a follower was something that I heard all of the time. And so and I can't say that It has been easy because sometimes it's very lonely and isolating, because there aren't a lot of women like me in the Red Cross, or as my career evolved in the positions that I've had. But again, running away from that was not an option. And so my mother, who has been gone now for 5 years, I'm still hearing the tapes in my head of the responsibility to be out front if you can, and to make a path for someone else. And so I started out in Cincinnati in a master's program with a eye towards being a hospital administrator, and started at the Christ Hospital, and was there for several years, 18 years in total, including a stint with the Health Alliance, which no longer exists, and was the first African American hospital administrator, female, at that time. And it was my responsibility to show them that it's not a anathema. We are prepared for the job. We will do the job well. We will take the difficult assignments. I was always told to say yes. If I get a way to say yes, find a way to say yes, even if it's hard, and then make the space for being able to do well once you do. And so it has been something that I've wanted to do, because I think you have to be able to be an example that it can be done, and reduce the fear or hesitancy or reluctance that people have to hire people who look like me, by doing a good job every day, by showing that it can be done, and encouraging that it's not just me. I'm not special. I had an opportunity, and there are many, many others like me who deserve that opportunity as well. My challenge is getting them to be interested in work like the Red Cross, because people don't like to go to disasters and go to hurricanes and that kind of thing. But there's opportunities for leadership in every segment of our society, every sector within the nonprofit community, and we have to reduce the reluctance by getting to know, and by encouraging the development of our team so that they'll feel supported and interested in assuming leadership roles as well. And so responsibility, because of where I was, opportunities that I had, and being an example to make sure that others saw, this is a good decision, and we can find others who can do the same type of good work. So I'm optimistic, and I see the same thing that you're seeing, and I'm so excited about the diversity that we're seeing in leadership. At one time, that was in more supportive roles. I see more of that now in operational roles, and not just in the support positions. And I think that's a sign of progress, both here and across the country, but exceptionally good news here in Cincinnati, as I see more and more of that happening. I can't open up the paper or get online without seeing, someone else being promoted, a new diversity and inclusion director over at NKU, at UC Health. And
Cynthia Bernardo Bailey,
yes,
First Lady of Water. Here in Cincinnati,
exactly.
Among many others, yes.
Among many. And so I think that we have a lot to be proud of in the progress that we've made, and our sights on who we're cultivating for the future.
Can I ask a follow-up question regarding that? Because
of course,
Shirley Chisholm has a famous quote about, if they don't give you a seat at the folding, no, sorry, I just preempted my whole, sorry, Shirley. If you're not given a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And our very own local city councilwoman made headline news for bringing her own big, bright red folding chair as she was sworn in to City Hall. So the follow-up question is, did you ever have to push and advocate for yourself to assume these leadership positions in ways that maybe your counterparts may not have had to? What were the distinct points where you realized that no one's advocating for me, I don't have the same sort of robust networks of support and advocates within any of the industries that you were working? Was there ever a point where you just had to say, you know what, I've got to stand up for myself and bring my own folding chair to speak for myself?
It's kind of constant, and
I hear a lot of agreement.
I think, and I don't want to sound like poor, pitiful me, it is hard as an African American woman to be seen and to be heard. And, thank you. I mean,
It's okay to clap, guys.
Yes.
I mean,
it's a huge frustration because, I will say something and, it's like, glazed over eyes, and then someone else will say the same thing, a white male, maybe even a white female, and it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Mm-hmm. And it drives me crazy. It's like, well, did I not just say that? Mm-hmm. And I've not gotten over that. It still happens at the Red Cross. On the regular. Yes. And so I have tried not to flare my nostrils and have my lips disappear and get an attitude, and just come back at it with a different approach, a different way of framing the same question, or following up on what was said, and acknowledging that it was said, but also saying the next thing. So taking it to the next level. And so it's each situation is different. But I have also had the fortune of people giving me an opportunity. And from a career progression standpoint, people who looked at, what I was willing to do or had done, and the risks that I was willing to take, and allow me that opportunity. And I don't think there was ever a regret, because I always did the job. And I think we are high performers, highly critical of ourselves, and critical enough that we will do whatever it takes to get the job done, even if that means at our own expense. And so I think there's a balance that has to be struck there, because we try and overprove that we deserve the seat at the table.
Yeah.
And so
sometimes we make ourselves sick doing it too.
Absolutely.
We need to talk about that.
Absolutely. Our health outcomes are not great for a lot of stress that we endure because of having to be heard and forcing ourselves to be heard. And so I bring the folding chair in every day in some way. Now, in the role that I'm in, I'm fortunate that I'm able to make more decisions, although I am the CEO of this region. I am not the CEO of the American Red Cross. And so make no mistake that I am still in that larger organization trying to make a way and be heard as my counterparts say the same thing that I've said, but maybe in a different way and certainly with a different voice.
So just listening to everything you say, to me, what resonates to me is that there's this internal conversation constantly that I'm sure you have,
Absolutely.
A lot of us have, regardless of what side of the fence you sit on. And I guess my question to you is, as you look internally and you deal with the challenges, but you're looking at the mirror and saying, okay, I got this, I can do this, keep bringing another chair. This chair might not fit at the table, let's get a bigger chair, a smaller chair, whatever the case may be. When did it click for you? When did it click when you had this realization that you were a leader, you were a force? And I guess my question is, when was that arrival moment for you in terms of your role as a leader, or the self-awareness around your capacity to lead?
That's another thing that ebbs and flows, to be honest with you, because your confidence is only as good as your last victory. And I think, again, in the vein of me wanting to prove myself, I feel good about the things that I've been able to accomplish, but those are fleeting, because they are not long-lasting. Now, I will tell you that the moment that the preschool promise passed, not because I did it by myself, but because we had built a coalition of people who made that possible, but on work that I started back in 2003, it made me feel really good about sticking with it, because it was very, very difficult to convince this community that preschool should be a priority, that kindergarten readiness mattered, and that it was something that we should invest $15 million in a year for 5 years. And it was sticking with it and really doing the work to make the case for it with data, because what you measure, you believe. Made me feel real good about having the tenacity and then having the support that was needed to make that landmark success in this community. But I had been working for probably 20 years when that happened. And so I've had moments along the way, but the big things like that, you have to take stock in, but also recognize that you can't do it alone. And sometimes I think we do a lot by ourselves. We, take on a lot of burdens by ourselves because it's hard to form the coalition because of all of the perceived or real barriers that we face as African American women. And so sometimes it's just easier to do it by ourselves. But the reality is, and I heard this today on a panel that I did with the Crossroads event at Freedom Center, the first thing you should do is find someone who believes what you believe and do it together. Because it's too hard to do by yourself. And you need to have that support. And you also want to have the backup in the event that you do decide to change. And so getting to the point where we're comfortable creating those collaborations and partnerships to be successful is something that we all should work on, because one is lonely, and two, it's just darn difficult to do by ourselves. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah,
but.
no doubt.
No, you go.
Okay.
No, you go.
You go.
No, you go.
Rock, paper. So it's a new year, right? It's a new decade, and there's honestly, in my opinion, there's a synergy going around in the city. There's I call it a creative
Renaissance.
Yeah, creative renaissance of consciousness, collective consciousness, and folks in my generation and the generation beneath me, we're ready, are positioning ourselves to be ready. As this transition begins to emerge. How's the city adapting to this transformation? That's part one. And then part two, how can the city help cultivate this new synergy and generation of leaders so that we don't leave?
Yeah. The thing that I love about Cincinnati is, again, we look ourselves in the mirror and recognize that there's opportunity for improvement. And I think the last decade has been one of emerging from being pretty paternalistic to being more open and inclusive. Not completely there yet. There's still a whole lot more that needs to be done. But I think that there is a recognition that if we want to be competitive, if we want to hang on to the talent that we have, if we want people to see this as a vibrant city and stay, that we have to be open to including others in the opportunities that exist, or allow them to create their own opportunity. There's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, the thing that I hope for the city is that there be a better attention to shared power. Because there is still a bit of a top-down kind of mentality and approach to decision-making and who gets to choose and who gets to participate. But I think, one, the younger generation is huge. Two, we want the city to be competitive. And, there's a lot of pride in people who leave Cincinnati and come back to the city, or who are from the city and stay. But you have to give people something to want to stay for. I mentioned my children, who one is here and left for a short while and came back, and the other two I hope will come back. They're now in D.C. It's very competitive. I mean, to have them come back from D.C., I'm like, please? And they come back and they see what's happening over the Rhine. They see what's happened down on the banks. And I think they see what's happening now potentially with transportation. Despite the, fits and stops that we've had with that, optimistic that we'll see some change there. But we have to be bold about allowing young people to do what they believe they can do, but also be willing to mentor so that they understand that there is some wisdom that comes with time. And that means sharing power. That means sharing control. That means sharing resources. I love the degree of entrepreneurship that's happening here. How do we cultivate that? How do we invest in that? And make sure that there are successes in the incubation projects that are going on around this community, that young people have the energy and talent to cultivate, but need the support, both in training and in resources to make that happen.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go for it.
So you just said a lot, and this is I'm gonna make a statement. You don't have to answer this one. This is just a statement I want to make.
Rhetorical?
There's this level of pride in this city, and I have no idea where it comes from. Me not being from here, when I moved here, I felt it, and it's what has kept me here. And I'm just curious about where in the hell does this sense of pride and love for the city comes from? You can answer that if you choose to, but just hearing you talk about it, that's what resonates with me, so that's one. I do want to talk about the generations, though. Like, we're a tech-savvy generation, you know. We constantly we're on our phones where we can multitask. I mean, some say we don't know how to communicate effectively, but are you experiencing any friction? Are you seeing the gap in this generation? And you speak about we have to be open to mentor and cultivate it, but are you seeing any challenges with the difference in our generation, just how we're wired?
Obviously, yes. I mean, there are differences in every generation, and there should be. Hopefully, you'll learn from the things that, the mistakes that we made, and we'll build upon the things that we've done that are effective and successful. And so, by virtue of that, you have to do things differently. I worry somewhat because I'm in a generation that was in between the onslaught of technology and paper. Thus, I have my phone with my notes and my hard-written copies with my notes. Yes, that's right. I just am confused. But the thing that I believe to be true, despite our reliance on technology, is that relationships are being built. I was worried for some time about the younger generation's ability to build relationships when everything was here. When in the mall you were talking to the friend with you next to you by your phone. And what that was going to do for our ability as a society to negotiate and build relationships and defend ourselves if need be, and to have the ability to negotiate and get along. But I don't think that's the case. I think if anything else, the technology has given young people access to information that allows them to form opinions that are deep. And so I keep going back to my children, but I just love listening to them. And I get really proud because their conversations are amazing. And I think, I don't know that I was that deep when I was that age. But it's been forced on them because they have access to everything. And they have an opinion about what they read and they talk about it. At least that's what I've experienced with the young people who come to my house. And I just keep serving them food so I can listen to what they're talking about. And I don't always agree with it and I interject. But I have no fear that the relationship building and the expression is there. I think that where it has been a little bit of a concern for me is for young children, and the relationship between a parent and a child should never be substituted by a screen. And the nurturing, the love, the communication, all has to be parent to child, not, this is okay, this is a supplement to the relationship between the parent and the child. And that I've seen, and that's bothersome to me. I'm sorry, am I talking too long?
No, I was just saying, no, not at all, you're here. No, I'm laughing visibly, and I apologize, but my daughter's here in the corner. My daughter is a student at the Waldorf School. Her name is Araba, so my partner is sitting next to her. And at the Waldorf School, one of the tenets is that screens are a supplement and not to dominate how we connect with people. And I often tell her, one day you'll thank me for limiting your screen time. But I know when we hit those teen years, it's not going to be easy. But to your point, she's not feeling it. Yeah, violently precocious. But you said something that was really interesting about the blessing of this, and that it's given access to information at a pace that that continues to increase and grow. And it also has created access points to connect with our tribes, right? Not where it becomes dangerous or maybe troublesome is where the finding your tribe turns into tribalism. But what I sense as one of the distinct opportunities with this is, you can connect with people who think like you, or people who don't think like you, and it gives you an opportunity, if you're curious enough, to find out, well, I may not agree with your opinions, but let me kind of plumb the depths of what you think so I can have a sense of, where you're coming from. Along those lines, I kind of want to shift the dialogue here because, of course, it is, a little bit after 7, and we're here to talk about shaping the city proper, right? And we've got a lot of city shapers. Can you say that 3 times fast, G?
No.
Without embarrassing yourself on national television? Okay. We have an entire room filled with city shapers. Eric Avner is here of Haile Foundation. Where is Eric?
He's in the back.
Hiding in the back.
He has a scruffy beard.
Stephanie, Eileen Cooper Reed, Dina Taylor, Chase from Detroit, but still shaping all kinds of cities. When you think of this word, shaping the city, can you kind of illustrate for us, from your standpoint, the who, the how, and the what?
I think it's what you've mentioned. I think it's a combination of how we prioritize our investments and what we are investing in. It's been a long time coming. The city, as I mentioned, when I was young, I came here for vacation because it was very vibrant, and then there was a lull. And I think we kind of went to war with each other, and there was a lot of tension. But we've emerged from that, and I would say over the last 20 years, we have really begun to, particularly in the last 10 years, invest in things that we know will make us better and make us grow and make us competitive and attractive as a destination for vacations and a place to call home for many. And to me, those investments have been in things like 3CDC. And looking at how do we take advantage of this beautiful real estate and architecture in our city in a way that allows us to create a great place to dine, to be entertained. But how do you do that without making people who live there feel like they're not a part? And so that is the yin and yang of our investment and what shaping really looks like. I think we have a lot of work to do to shape in a way that is inclusive and allows everyone to participate and remain whole. So from a development standpoint, certainly looking at the investment in some of our urban communities and on the bank so that there are things for people to do that make them want to come here and stay here. I think investing in our people. There are so many training programs, and we still have issues with not having enough skilled workers that would have allowed Amazon to choose us. And so what are we doing and what could we be doing differently to create the talent pool that would allow us to be attractive for major corporations, to close the gap that our current home-based companies have in talent, because that's still there. And how do we invest in understanding what needs to be taught in the classroom or in the lab that would prepare that person to go right into the workforce if going to college isn't necessarily the right trajectory for them. But then on the other hand, we've invested in our young children in the preschool promise. And certainly that is a long-term investment that starts with them being ready for kindergarten, but is an investment in them being a productive member of our community. And having the opportunity to graduate from high school and go on to some post-secondary education. I'm hoping that we invest in our transportation. I keep saying that because it's just so important. It's so important. And, you know, talk about young people. My kids, they have cars and they don't want them. You know, my kids in D.C. have cars and don't need them. And so they park them and they get on the train and they're wherever they need to be. Obviously, we're not going to have rapid transit for a long time, but we need to have something that allows people to spend their money on things that are going to allow them to thrive, that don't put gas and fumes in our environment, but allows them to get to work. And so I'm very optimistic, maybe a bit idealistic, but to me, that's a major investment that we have to make. So that's kind of, you know, as I think about shaping, it's at an infrastructural level and it's at an individual level. I also think that we need to invest in these kinds of conversations, because when it's all said and done, the thing that holds us back, and we're not alone in that, is our fear of the people that we don't know, our inability to overcome that fear to get to know them, and our bringing to the table our own implicit biases that keep us from having a positive inclination versus a hesitation or a negative type of reaction to the people that we don't know. And so I think we need to invest in ways that allow us to get to know our neighbor, literally and figuratively, so that we can be a better city, not go back to some of the racial tensions that we've had in the past, and that we'll be a true diverse city. Right now, diversity is primarily black and white in Cincinnati, still in 2020. And so I'm glad we're a sanctuary city, but what does that mean?
Right. Thank you. That's a really comprehensive, broad view.
Geez, where do we want to go? How are we doing on time? I want to make sure.
Well, I have, we've got more questions, but yeah, go for it.
Is it time for Q&A?
Not yet.
Okay, good. So
we can start it earlier if you're inclined to start.
Stephanie, what's so unique about you is when you look at your work in the nonprofit space? I mean, if we look at it in buckets, healthcare, right, education, and social services, and you sit you sit in a seat where you can look at issues through different lenses. How has your background and experience allow you to effectively lead? And for a future leader who is primarily in the education space, what can they do to essentially get up to speed our
You know, I'm reading a book now, and I got it for Christmas, and so I'm not finished with it. It's called The Invaluable Laws of Growth by John Maxwell. Have you all heard of it? It's really, really good. And there's 15 laws of growth that really guide what you need to do, and when you practice them, your opportunities for success are more likely than not. But I think the one that has struck me is intentionality. Being very intentional about what it is you want to do, having a plan for how you're going to do it, but then also recognizing when you've done it and when it's time to move on. And not being afraid that, you have reached that time, but not let that time come when it's past due. And so for me, it's my career has been one where I've tried to stay ahead of the curve just enough that it allowed me to give as much as I could to what I was doing, and leave at a time that allowed me to avoid what might have been a catastrophe for my own personal outcomes and growth, and go to something that I thought I could do better, building on what I've learned, but going on to something better. So what does that mean? I was in healthcare for about 20 years. And I had a variety of different positions, starting out in hospital administration. Started a program called HealthSpan, which is it was a provider-sponsored PPO, preferred provider organization. And along came the Health Alliance. And I was asked to come and help start the Health Alliance, which is now defunct, after billions of dollars of investment in creating this alliance of 6 hospitals and physician practices, and it was a great model, but got in its own way, and I won't get into what led to the demise of it, but I knew when I had done as much as I could to do what I was asked to do. Creating the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, really is just diversity at that time, for the organization. Making sure that we merged the advertising and communications functions and created a new brand, and helping to create the new organizational structure, meaning getting the board on board and all of the governance kinds of things that go with creating a new organization. And then it began to fall apart. And fall apart in my perspective. It ultimately did fall apart, but it fell apart for me because what became the predominant focus was reducing costs and not the quality of care and doing better for the community. And I got to that point and realized that I think I've done all that I can do, and decided to go into another healthcare organization for a short period of time. But that's when the civil unrest happened in Cincinnati, and my kids were young, and I really had to fight with, is this the place that I want to be? Is this the best place for my children? Certainly my boys, who have been stopped and profiled, and have had all of the experiences, and I had to talk to them. I have had to talk with all 3 of my kids, and got to the point of, okay, it's better that I help than run. And that's when I went to Success by 6. Spent 14 years there. The culmination of it was the Preschool Promise. And I did everything I could to make the Preschool Promise effective, getting it off the ground in a year's time, and did all that I could do to make it operational and getting the first 1,000 children enrolled. But that was all I could do. And I had a painful recognition of that when I thought I wanted to do the job long term, and then realized that the job wasn't for me. Or maybe they didn't want me in the job. I don't know which one it was, but I knew that it was time to move on. And that's when the opportunity at the Red Cross opened up. So it truly is, when one door closes, another one opens, but you have to be prepared to step out of one and into another, and not let your fear of change hold you back from growing. And so, my plan to be a CEO of a hospital system never came to fruition, because that opportunity wasn't for me. But I do believe that being the CEO of the Red Cross, for me, and my passion for helping other people and being in the nonprofit sector, is just as good. And that is for me, and I'm glad that I took the steps that I did that allowed me to get there, because if at any point I said I wasn't going to do that, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing today.
So I think that was great. Thank you for taking us back through that, because it kind of leads to the last question before Q&A. You have one more question? You want to ask it? Okay.
What's your question?
Let's go ahead.
Well, so, part of what we're doing now is having this dialogue in a way that we can get to know each other better. But another part of the dialogue is getting to know how we all live and how we can all be human together. And you mentioned something that just resonated and struck a chord with me, which was the fear that we have of getting to know our neighbors. And I'm just curious to know if you can give us any tips. I feel like the history of being a person in today's world, I mean, forget about being black or being a woman, that adds on extra layers. But what I mean is, just to be a person in this world is to know the story of fear, and to know the story of building your resilience to reach out and get to know others. What are some practical things that you rely on as a personal practice to step outside of comfort in the interest of getting to know people who may not be like you?
Sure. I don't know that I have any revolutionary answer. I mean, I think that some of it is just kindness. I think that there's a lot to be said for being kind, and nice to people, saying hello never hurt, being self-effacing. As I walked in with some women who, Eileen, one of them, but, I was standing at the elevator in the parking garage, hadn't pressed the button to open the door to go up, into the building. Just standing there thinking about today, and two ladies were there, came and pressed the button, and laughed, and, broke the ice. A lot of it is just breaking the ice. People are people, and people, most people are friendly and want to be seen as friendly and kind. And I think that our unwillingness to break the ice prevents us from finding out that there are good people out there. Now, does that mean that I'm going to invite them home to dinner? No.
Right.
But it's building a level of comfort and taking down that mystique that had I not had that, if I had stood there and just looked kind of, stoic or, stuck in my own thinking, that would have been a missed opportunity. And so I'm sure that there are theories and that this has been studied and there are ways to overcome fear, but I think a lot of it is, being true to yourself and, having a sense of being approachable and warm and kindness. And that's another thing that's kind of playing in the back of my head, because I was always said you can get more bees with honey than with vinegar. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And you guys know how old I am now, because I don't know whose mother says that anymore. But it's so true. I mean, it doesn't hurt to be kind.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like you also build a muscle to be kind to yourself too. Because when you're good to yourself, you can be good to others, and you can be kind to others, right?
So we started off the conversation with, when did you fall in love with the city? And I'm gonna ask this last question before we go to Q&A. What is your heart longing for the city? I mean, what is your heart longing for the city?
More progress on getting better at being good so that we get to great. It's a good city. I love Cincinnati. I've had my moments, but I've stayed because I know that there's a lot of potential. I would love to see it reach its full potential. And the thing that I am curious about is how we overcome our hesitancy in bringing more people to the table to make decisions that affect everybody. I still think, and I mentioned earlier, that a lot of decision-making is top-down. And the decisions that really matter are made in rooms that many of us are not in. And we find out about it after the fact. And the table just has to be much broader than that. We have to overcome the fear of that shared power and be willing to take the risk that when you do put more chairs at the table or allow more folding chairs to be brought in, that you're going to get to a better decision. And I think that we still have a fear that the best decisions are made by a small group versus the best decisions being made by a broader group that represents the whole. And some of that probably is rooted in implicit bias and, all of the things that we grow up with that people just have rooted in their thinking that aren't true, that they've not really understood our biases, and those decisions really influence those attitudes really influence the decisions that are made. And so I don't know what the magic bullet is that will make that happen, but I think we have had examples of that. And we're getting better at understanding what's working and doing more to scale those things up with data and evidence that they are working. And I think more of that is absolutely necessary with more people at the table who have benefited from those programs and those initiatives. We're moving from diversity and inclusion to belonging, and I love that because belonging means that you're really working to make sure that those that we say are our neighbors, who are part of our community, feel like it's their community. And we have to stop making decisions that affect people who've had no seat at the table and who are affected the most. And that we have to think about another way of making great decisions and allowing the city to thrive, but with more people at the table.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
What a poignant note to end on, and I think this is a perfect segue into our Q&A segment. But wait.
Keep going.
So, Urban Consulate is this emerging space for dialogue, and we're trying to experiment a little bit with engagement with this platform. And one of the experimental things we want to try out tonight is, instead of you getting the firing squad of Q&A to start out, we want to give you an opportunity to mine the minds of everybody in this audience. And I'm curious to know, Stephanie, do you have a question that's been lingering in your mind that you could benefit, hearing some answers from our lovely audience tonight?
Okay. So it goes back to a question that you asked about these little devices and any fears that I have about what limitations come about as a result of our reliance on technology. And it goes beyond that. And I think that you can characterize I hate to say millennials because it's really not a monolith, but I do think that the younger generation has a very individualistic kind of mentality and approach to the world that's fueled by information and maybe discourse. But the really good things that happen in a community are oftentimes through collective effort. They can't be done by one person. And so I guess my question is, how do you achieve collective impact, truly, outcomes for the city, when we have a increasingly individualistic society, younger generation who's focused on their individual contributions, their individual advancement, where being at a job for a year is okay instead of staying and really making change? How do you get to the level of collective kind of impact and improvement that I think really is necessary for broad sweeping change to happen, like the preschool promise?
I see a hand all the way back in the back.
All right.
Young lady with the braids.
Get my cardio on right now.
Great question.
I think it's not as grand and as complicated as maybe we may think. The individuality is very important and very key, but I think also the aim is to individually bringing your open-minded idea into a collaborative space. It really goes back to what you had mentioned earlier, where when you are building something, you have to have a coalition and a group that works together. Mm-hmm. So I think not necessarily putting yourself in a box. That I think the concept most people think is you have to put your personal opinion or your personal want aside and then come as a group. Not necessarily. You could do it bringing your own, but then sort of talking it out and then learning to sort of be and exist in a space where people have differing ideas. And that it really goes back to really people sort of putting themselves in a position where it's very, very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you. That's great.
One more?
Maybe one more? Mm-hmm.
Well, I would just like to piggyback on that, because I think that part of it is we could be individualistic, but we can also recognize that, our experiences aren't taboo. You talked about public transportation, and, that really resonates, because I'm pretty sure, each and every one of us have our own public transportation experience. So if you take that experience and say, look, I want to make a difference in this lane, I'm pretty sure you could bring other people along with you. So, you could turn those individual ideals into things for the people.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
You want one more, or anybody else want to touch on that?
Anybody else have some thoughts on this very important question? No? Well, let's open it up to questions
All
from
right,
the
well,
audience.
I'll just stay out here.
So we're going to give, we'll come back to you if there's time, okay? But we're going to give some other new people a chance to ask some questions, yeah.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. My name is Jordan Ivory. Stephanie, I've heard you speak multiple times and have hosted you myself, and I really appreciate your authenticity and genuineness in all the things that you spill, and especially the gems that you've dropped tonight. Being a black female CEO in a space that really hasn't seen many, and I know in a previous talk you gave the stats and it blew my mind. Being a director in a nonprofit, being an emerging leader here in Cincinnati, I pose the question to you, how do I grow in my leadership to then let me lay a little landscape. I've worked in corporate positions and been an intrapreneur to have to navigate barriers just due to technology. And hearing you talk about technology in the sense that you are is phenomenal. How do I, as an emerging leader, listen to the individuals who work under me and hear the opinions without kind of pushing them away the way that I have gotten pushed back in terms of trying to incorporate CRMs and project management tools and things that allow the workspace to be transparent, which helps me as a black male who has been a first black male in the corporate sector and in some spaces I've been in, as well as the first male. So we've been taught how to navigate racism. We haven't necessarily been taught as a black man how to navigate sexism. But how do I increase the technology and listen to the individuals below me without giving pushback? Because working for an Eric Kearney, working with the Stephanie Byrd, you guys are open to the new wave of working. How do I prepare myself to have open ears?
Okay. So, I think that you just said it to a certain extent. I mean, the chatter that you hear from those that you work with have nuggets of the future. And I think that cultivating that, having those conversations is really, really important because we get very tunnel visioned on a day-to-day basis and lose sight of what a new idea really is. And new ideas come out of controversy and chaos and dissension all of the time. Doesn't mean that it's always going to happen, but I think when you start closing your eyes and your ears to it and characterizing it as noise instead of what it might be, you become biased yourself. And so it's important not to discount what you're hearing as just noise because there may be nuggets, and I think it's worth engaging them in. If it becomes, disruptive and, counterproductive to getting the job, then that's another matter. But I think what you're talking about is that tension, that healthy tension as to what is the right direction. That's how entrepreneurship is born. And that is how we get better. It's all about growth and being intentional about it. It's also not being afraid of those who might have a better idea than your own, and that's self-awareness. And I am at a point where I know I don't have all the good ideas. I happen to have gotten to the point where I can be the CEO, but I cannot do the job that I need to do if I was to be the one that had to go out and help people whose houses had burned, or if I had to go to a disaster where a hurricane or a tornado had happened. And so, because you have to grow from what others' experiences have been. And so it's really being open to that and not just characterizing it as noise or a frustration.
Other questions? I see your hand go. Wait, I'm sorry. I'll get to you. I saw your hand before I ran up, so.
You spoke about being in the neighborhood for as long as you have, 20 plus years, and so I'm sure you've seen a lot of the change in the different neighborhoods. And I wanted to know where you think the line is in terms of development. Like, you see change in Walnut Hills, change in neighborhoods such as Over the Rhine, and you talked about how you want the area to be desirable for people to want to stay, but where is the line in terms of Black people not being able to afford the neighborhood anymore after it's been sort of developed or gentrified? Where do you feel the line is in terms of
Yeah.
How do you make a neighborhood desirable while also still keeping it affordable for those who live there?
I think it's a great question. It's one of the questions that really burns in my soul when I see how the city is getting better in some respects and not better for everybody. And I mean, we have witnessed a transformation in Over the Rhine and now the West End, or actually the West End, then Over the Rhine, and now back to the West End, and without a plan for allowing the natives of that community to remain. And I have a problem with the fact that that happens time and time again. And we have not developed a strategy, part of our infrastructure, that says we will invest in allowing people who are from these neighborhoods to stay in these neighborhoods, whether it's having protected rent zones that allow the rent or housing or taxes to not go up just because more expensive homes or businesses have been built. I mean, we could fix this, but you have to have an intention and a plan and a willing to invest in that so that everyone feels like they have an opportunity to benefit. And so I read the book Them a long time ago. It's a great book on gentrification in the Sweet Auburn district of Atlanta, and the signs that it's happening, and the ability to engage early on so that there are opportunities to participate and to have your needs met or at least understood and heard. We have to be at the table. If the meeting is held, we have to be at the meetings. But first we have to make sure that there's a meeting. And because it's a two-way street. We have to express what our needs are, our desires are, by showing up and making sure that we have the opportunity to be heard.
Good. So I'm gonna go here, then I got you over there. And then time check, are we good on time?
We're good.
All right, cool.
We've got 20 minutes for Q&A.
Hey, Stephanie. Thanks for this conversation. It's been really awesome.
Thank you.
So a couple times you've alluded to Cincinnati maybe still having a top-down process and mindset at times. I wonder if you could expand on that and maybe give a couple examples without calling anybody out too much, and what you think could have gone better or ways that it could have been less top-down.
Sure. So much of our city's progress is as simple as following the money. And money is vested at high levels in rooms that most people aren't a part of. The city has thrived because of the very successful companies that are here. It's one of the things that gives us a lot of pride. We are home to so many Fortune 500 companies, and that is an asset. But we want it to remain an asset. And yet, at the same time, a lot of decisions around how we grow, how our education system is funded, even things like the preschool promise, are controlled by rooms of people who represent the best of our community in terms of business, but not the full community. And so I think either that table needs to be broadened, or there needs to be a parallel table that then comes together to say, how do we prioritize what's important collectively? Instead of letting all of the decisions rest with where the money is. Because if we let that happen, things will continue to be decided the way they are, and we won't have the level of inclusiveness that will have people feel like they have a place here, that they belong here, stay here, or come back here. That's my opinion, but I've seen it on so many fronts for a long, long time.
I just want to make a quick housekeeping note, well, just an announcement. So we understand that a lot of people have questions, and we might not have enough time to get to everybody's questions. So I'm going to pass around these Post-its, okay? So if you have a question, or if you want to maybe explore a potential topic I have an idea of a potential speaker, please write it on this Post-it, and on your way out, you can just post it on the opposite side of the front entrance at the Mercantile. Okay, everybody got that? Cool. Let's go to the next question.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi.
My name is Derek Dansby. I'm a real estate agent. I have done a lot of stuff economically in the city for a while. And some of the things that you're pointing on, I think are great. I think we need to really identify. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on what the root causes of some of these problems are. Because for me, as a person who's worked for 3CDC long time ago, and now as a real estate agent, I see our problems rooted in economics. You know, our poverty rate, we've got 1 in 4 individuals who are in poverty. That number is moving to 1 in 3. African Americans have less than 35% home ownership rate in the city. We're not acquiring wealth. We're going on trips. We're having a good time. We're loving life, which is great. But our wealth has not increased. So our communities are changing, but yet African Americans aren't investing in the communities that they've historically held. They're selling their property and leaving, which is fine. But the problem is that more people aren't coming back. So now, like you said, our county is turning purple, and now our suburbans are growing. As you being involved with Success by 6, now with the American Red Cross, what level of economic education, wealth building, wealth training, asset development, asset acquisition does that play in shaping our future?
Oh my, it's everything. It is everything. It's at every level, to be honest with you. It's funny because I talked about selling my house and moving back into the city. My kids are, I know you would. My kids would have my head though, because their opinion, and this sounds really harsh, is that no African American should ever be allowed to sell property. I mean, my son actually said it should be illegal for an African American to sell property because we are so behind the 8 ball in terms of property ownership. He was kidding, sort of, but not really. I know, right? But, and I kicked myself because they suggested that I buy property down over the Rhine before it began, its evolution, and I didn't. But a lot of that is fear, and lack of financial literacy in our community. I'm embarrassed to say that, I have a son who's got more college debt than I'd like for him to have because I allowed him to make decisions that I knew he shouldn't make, but I allowed him to because I wanted him to, as he said, it's my life, so I wanted him to live his life. Well, he made a very, very difficult financial mistake in doing so. So we have to get smarter about the do's and don'ts, understand the implications of our decisions, what it really means to save, delayed gratification instead of immediate gratification. All of those things that would help us create something to hand off to our children that we don't have to spend today. And so I think there's a lot more financial literacy, economic education that needs to happen, parent to child. And then from a community standpoint, the opportunity to be able to invest in those areas that are on the uprise. And so if you're in a Walnut Hills or in an Evanston, where you may have property and have, grew up there, and you see all of the development around you, having a community that's open to you investing in that property next door where somebody left because they were your neighbor, and giving you the benefit of being from the community and having more rights as someone from the community to acquire that property than someone coming from outside in. Those kinds of infrastructural and financial strategies need to be considered so that people who are in the community can stay and develop their own wealth while we're also getting smarter about maintaining the resources that we have.
So I think we have time for 2 questions. My brother in the back, you still want the mic? You sure? Okay, I just want to make sure. All right. So we have this one, and then we're going to have one more question.
Sure, I thought you were going to ask me to use my teacher voice. Great conversation. I am evidence that the city is changing. I was born here, left as a small kid, said I would never move back. And I held an education conference, decided to hold it here in Cincinnati, saw a lot of the changes that had happened, and literally went back to Atlanta where I was living and came back the next weekend and bought a home. So, yeah, I mean, because I didn't imagine Cincinnati would ever be a place I could call home. So there are a lot of that. I think people talked about, like, how do we make that happen? A number of my friends are also people that have roots here and have moved back. But there is a kind of provincial mindset amongst a lot of people who don't let you move forward because you didn't go to high school here or you didn't go to college here. How do we address that for all the people that are deciding to return home but may not meet the sort of shifting standards of what makes someone a native?
Okay, wow, so, that is a great question, and I didn't go to high school either, but I have kids who did. And I think that's a source of pride, that, you know, you went to high school here. What school did you go to? I would say that surrounding yourself with people who aren't from here for me, it allowed me to move forward and not feel like I was being suppressed by those who did not want me to, because I didn't. There weren't people who were saying you couldn't because you aren't from Cincinnati, but there's a level of acceptance or lack thereof based on your being from here. And it probably took me a good 12 years after I moved here to actually feel like I was a part of the city. And I think the city has to get comfortable with people who may not be just like them. I've had people say to me, you know, do you have a problem in the city? Why do people always stare? And I think more curiosity than being rude. But I think a lot of it is just the tenacity and finding your posse that thinks like you, that supports you and what you're trying to do, that allows you to continue to move forward. And at some point, your success begets more success and makes you part of the community. But it really is just something that good old grit is required. And not being willing to be deterred just because you aren't from here. And I have heard that from a lot of people who are not from here, and I think that's still a thing. But they're often hanging out with each other and getting by because they're hanging out with each other.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question.
So keep in mind, I wish we had enough time for everybody's question.
Oh, okay.
So I'm sorry. I'm going to be the bad guy today. But please fill it out, put it on the wall. We're going to get it some kind of way. We're going to give this last question to the out-of-towner. And this is Chase Cantrell. Stand up, Chase. Give me some love, y'all. This man drove all the way from Detroit just to be here. He didn't have any additional meetings. He just came just for this conversation. So I feel like he deserves to ask a question. So here you go.
Appreciate it. So I really want to thank you for kicking off Urban Consulate Cincinnati in this decade. And this is a fabulous talk. So I used to host Urban Consulate in Detroit. So I've probably attended 75 of these kinds of conversations over time. In my work, not just through Consulate, but I'm a real estate developer as well, takes me to black cities across the nation. So majority black cities, high population black cities. And I jokingly said to the founder of Consulate through text, as you were talking, that you could have replaced the word Cincinnati with Detroit throughout this entire conversation, and it would have been perfectly fine.
So interesting.
And I feel that way about Memphis. I feel that way about so many other cities. And I know that you interact with other, American Red Cross executives, and you see other cities and you read the data and you see the stats. And I'm wondering, do you see the state of Black America being fairly constant across similarly situated cities? And if you do, what gives you hope in your work? This is something I'm struggling with personally, right? Seeing the state of black cities and black populations, talking about displacement and wealth building, and all these conversations we have in all these different cities, just trying to find the hopefulness in our future. So just wondering what bolsters you in your work.
Yeah, boy, we're gonna have to stop on that one. No, it's an interesting phenomenon, and Yes, I do see the same kinds of dynamics, the disparities that exist in most urban cities around African Americans exist in many of the cities where there's a Red Cross. There are a lot of cities that have Red Cross regions that aren't as diverse because we're everywhere, a lot of rural communities as well. But, you know, what gives me hope is one, recognition of that, and the fact that you have to remain hopeful, and you have to have a strategy. And that strategy is one that's born out of your own interest in the survival of our community and what we can do to be better, to be able to participate, to have a voice, and having people who support you. We have to surround ourselves with people who have our backs, whether we're working out with them, having coffee with them, having bourbon with them. We have to have an ability to relax and release because the work is hard and it cannot be over. We just can't let it be over. There are some glimmers of hope when you look at our longevity and a slight uptick in our health outcomes, but we've got a long, long way to go from an economic sustainability perspective. And what I need to do as someone who is closer to the end of my career is make sure that those who are closer to the beginning of theirs, that we're in conversation with each other for support, for information exchange, for encouragement, because we can't afford to not keep working. It will never happen if we give up. So again, going back to my earlier comment, if you stop, you lose. And we can't afford to lose. We have every right to fight for what we believe is important for us and for our children and their children. And that's a justice issue. And when it all comes down to it, and I don't know if you all have seen Just Mercy. We won't go there. But we have a right to participate in all that's good in this country. But if we don't fight for it, we won't get it, because it will not be given without some degree of sacrifice.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's been a pleasure to hear from you and hear more about not just your professional achievements, but what rests inside of your heart that informs what you do in every facet of your life. So it's been an honor to have you here. We want to thank everybody in the audience tonight, too. You guys brought excellent questions and great, I hope, insights for Stephanie about collective impact. Just a couple of thank yous as well.
Before we do that, can we give her a round of applause?
Yes. Thank you.
It takes, well, number one, I felt like our friendship was on the line if this didn't go well. So, thank you guys for not asking an insane question. But no, it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to come on the stage and just answer questions at the magnitude in which we throw them at you. So I really appreciate it. We appreciate it. To go to the thank yous.
Yeah, so we are all here today because of people like Stephanie, because of you, G. But it's important to recognize the role, the very important role that the Haile Foundation via People's Liberty played in operationalizing Urban Consulate here in Cincinnati. Where is Eric? Is he still hiding?
I think he skedaddled. Okay.
Did he skip out? Okay. So Eric Avner oversaw this beautiful experiment here in Cincinnati for 5 years. That was People's Liberty, that shuttered their doors. And they created this beautiful setting and answered the question, what could happen if you gave the resources and voice and a place to people of the city and let them decide how they can lend their voices and their talents to make big, beautiful changes. That was 5 years of work, and we conceive of Urban Consulate as the legacy organization and legacy effort that lives on beyond the four walls of People's Liberty. So a big round of applause, please, for the Haile Foundation and People's Liberty. And also many thanks to so many of our creative and production and just organizational collaborators, not least JP sitting or standing behind the camera there, audiovisual from Afrochine. Where's Yemi as well? Is he here? Hi, from Afrochine. We want to thank Amy. Where are you, Amy? In the back. Can you wave? Give a round of applause. Amy has helped us conceive of this beautiful arrangement for today's talk and will continue to be an ongoing collaborator for Urban Consulate. We also want to thank...
Hold up, real quick.
Yes.
Quick plug from the Mercantile.
Yes.
If this is your first time at the Mercantile, this beautiful space, please stop by and talk to Amy, and she'll give you as much information about how you can potentially become a member, how you can learn about new events and programs here at the Mercantile. So I just wanted to plug Amy in the Mercantile. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, but please don't. Anytime there's an opportunity to give a plug for the Mercantile, do it, because this place is magic. If you've never been here before, come here during the day, over the weekend, just sit down, curl up with a great book, come to one of their many great programs, including this one. Also want to thank, I don't know if you noticed, we have a young woman writer back in the back, perched with her laptop. Her name is Layla. Layla is our official Urban Consulate writer. She is our embedded journalist, and she is documenting every single talk and will write a piece that will go on the Urban Consulate blog. I think there's some live tweeting going on as well. So we're so thrilled to be collaborating with you as well. We also want to thank also Megan Trischler,
Yes.
our co-host in absentia,
Yes.
for making this beautiful. And of course, the collaboration that we have here can only be possible with you. So we're so grateful to everybody in this space. And thank you for making this a great first Urban Consulate talk.
So our next conversation will be held same space, February the 10th. So the next Monday, the second Monday of the month in February. We'll be here having similar conversation with different people. So thank you again.
Yeah.